Hey, it's an honor and a pleasure to be with you guys tonight. I'll have a formal presentation. I give a little bit about my story, my journey, and I guess a few items that I do want to leave with the fellas. It's really really dope to see all you brothers together, and I love what you guys are doing. I was very surprised to get tagged that my TED Talk was being used. And then to see the group and the org that's using it again kind of made my heart smile. Normally, this is my business. I'll get into that in a little bit. So I do speaking and training, and so normally these type of sessions they cost. But I saw that these are my folks, these are my brothers. Like, man, these are the people who I get other people to subsidize me doing this type of work for my folks. So it's an honor to be with y'all. As was noticed earlier, and if you can't see from the shirt, man, born and raised in Oakland, California. Um, I lived there until I was 24. Um, had a bit of a troubled upbringing, broken home. My mom, unfortunately, growing up in for me, growing up in what was almost ground zero of the crack epidemic in the crack era. My mom became an addict and was an addict pretty much the majority of my life until she passed in 2011. My father, unfortunately, he was murdered when I was 10 years old. Grew up in the housing projects in Oakland, California, until my mom's addiction got so bad that we had to move. And like we didn't like pack boxes and like physically move. It was like we got ran about the projects. I lived in a dope house. And a dispute between the dope dealers who was operating on our spot. My mom and the stepdad, it got violent. Literally one day, this is where I'm staying, this is my home, and next day we basically evacuated. And so for the next 9 or 10 years or so, was raised by my grandmother. And while it was a blessing to have family who could take me in, it was also really difficult because my grandmother was really really tough and hard on me, abusive even. And so it made for a really, really difficult childhood, trying to fend for myself and just try to make some things shake. Um, and throughout that whole period, it's like my mom is kind of in and out of my life. Like I said, my dad is murdered, my grandmother's being abusive. So it was just a really, really traumatic time in my life. Police being called, family fights and disputes. Even though I wasn't living in the projects anymore, I was still living in, more or less the hood. So, it's another dope house straight across the street. Street life is just around. Um, Somehow navigated all of that. Um, Graduated from high school on time. Put myself through undergrad, got undergraduate business degree, um, and then leveraged that to get a job up in Portland, Oregon. Um, Portland wasn't on the top 100 places that I wanted to live, but that's where the opportunity was. They threw a few bucks at me, and so I made a shake up there. Got a master's degree while I was up there, and was kind of doing all right for myself. Then in 2011, got an opportunity to move here to Charlotte, and took that opportunity with a different company, um, and then ended up losing a job. Actually, I lost two jobs, two six-figure jobs in the span of about a year. And it led me to be like, you know what? Man, fuck this. I don't want to do this corporate thing anymore. And realized that I had a bit of a gift, I guess, and then some experience, some lived experience on trauma. And decided, you know what? I think I'm gonna go ahead and try my hand at building my own speaking business. And focused in specifically on trauma. and resilience. And that led me to doing the TED Talk that you guys saw. Yeah, I'm very, very proud of the TED Talk that I did. That was about, what, 6, 7 years ago now. Nearly 1 million views. I'm still in awe at the number of people who are using it in trainings or in different group settings, similar to this one. Folks who reach out to me, either want me to come speak or just let me know that, hey, the words that I had were really impactful. And as much as I appreciate not only the work that I did, but the feedback that I get on that TED Talk. And it's called What Trauma Taught Me About Resilience. I look at it now and feel like it's woefully incomplete. And not from like it's a problem or anything. It's just you you guys are brothers, so I'm guessing that you guys may be familiar with the phrase that some older Black folks would say, like when you maybe are wet behind the ears or you don't quite know something yet, they'll be like, just keep living, right? Just keep living. And as I continue to live in the intervening time between me doing the TED Talk and now, life don't me. And I realized that as ridiculously important and critical as resilience is, resilience alone isn't enough, right? There's a huge difference between being resilient and what it takes to actually recover from that resilience, or what it was that caused you to be resilient from. And one of the things that I really realized was that resilience is not the same as healing, right? I can be resilient from all of the different traumas that I spoke to you, that I, briefly mentioned, the things that, go unspoken, that, folks will never know about. It's just my own personal journey that were really, really painful and really impactful. I can be resilient from those things, but healing is a completely different thing. Those two things are not the same. And resilience is really an incomplete metric, especially as it relates to overcoming trauma. So resilience, I liken to being for life's boo-boos, right? Like those things that are impactful, those things that are problematic for you, but trauma is a different animal altogether, right? One of the things that helped get me through life was the fact that I played sports. And virtually every coach that I've had has uttered some version of the phrase, are you hurt or are you injured? Right? Knowing that there's a very big and vast difference between the two. If you're hurt, it may not necessarily feel good, but you can still take care of what it is what are your responsibilities to the team. You can still field your position, you can still hit your blocking assignments, you can still do whatever it is you need to do. It may not necessarily feel comfortable, but you can still do it. But if you're injured, that's a whole nother ballgame. Because not only are you a danger to yourself, right? Because the smallest little thing can re-injure it or it can cause additional damage, but also now you're a danger to the team, because the team can't count on you to do what it is that you're supposed to do. You can't field your position. You can't defend the way that you're supposed to do. So resilience is great for those hurts in life, but those injuries that occur in life, resilience is an inadequate measure or metric for being able to overcome it. And what we ultimately need to get to is a level of healing. And that healing is really, where the richness is at. That's where the recovery happens. One of the examples I use is like, a lot of us, we're all drivers and have been down the road and maybe a rock hit your windshield. And that rock hit your windshield will startle you a little bit. And, it may even leave a crack on your, a chip on your windshield, right? And that chip, it's small and you got a huge windshield. So it's like, it's not that big a deal. It might even spread a little bit and turn into a larger crack. But you still got this large windshield of which to be able to see, right? That windshield was resilient. it kept that rock from penetrating and getting through the windshield. But what happens if you get a whole bunch of rocks that hit that windshield? What happens if you got a lot of different chips and a lot of different cracks in that windshield? Now your vision starts to be more compromised, right? Instead of having this big, large field ahead of you to be able to see with all of these chips and all these cracks in it, now your vision is a little bit more difficult. Now it's a little bit tougher for you to actually navigate the road that you're on. And now you become a danger, not only to everybody who's around you, but to anybody who's in the car with you, anybody who you may come in contact with. The only thing that's going to actually get that vehicle back serviceable is to get it off the road, get that windshield tended to, get it repaired. Oftentimes, for us as humans, especially for us as Black people and Black men, we've experienced a whole bunch of trauma. And a lot of that trauma doesn't go diagnosed. We think that our windshield is just fine because we can see, but not recognizing that that vision is severely impaired. It's severely limited. And you're getting by, you're making do, but you're one additional chip. You're one additional thing that you don't see from causing some sort of collision and some sort of additional damage. And so while resilience is critically important, and in my TED Talk, I identified some of the things that can help us be more resilient, the recognizing how much power that we have, being prepared for different situations that come up, having a plan for what we're going to do, maintaining the right perspective about situations that we encounter, having perseverance when, you know, shit really just gets hard and we got to kind of knuckle down a little bit, having recognizing the purpose in the trials and tribulations that we may encounter, and having partners, having relationships and a network of people around who can help us. All of those things can help us be more resilient from what life throws at us. But once we survive whatever those traumas are, what really becomes more important is, what are we doing to heal? What are we doing to repair the damage that was done to us? And oftentimes, what folks don't recognize is we're having natural responses to unnatural occurrences, right? A lot of the things that we may have experienced, they're not natural things. Like, we weren't supposed to be abused. We weren't supposed to be neglected. We weren't supposed to have significant dysfunction and disarray all around us. But we made our way through all of those things. But again, they still have marks that are left. They still have damage that's done to us. And ultimately, what we need to do from there is to start to heal from those things. How do we acknowledge the fact that, yeah, you know, those things that that traumatized me so were really, really damaging, and it's okay. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm responding as a human, right? I'm responding as what would naturally happen to someone who's dealing with these abnormal circumstances. And so how do we acknowledge what it was that we had and then get intervention for it, right? I'm a huge, huge, huge proponent and advocate of mental health. We'll see someone for, if our elbow is hurting. I heard my man saying earlier that his foot or his leg was giving him some problems. What do? He went to the doctor for it. If any of our teeth start hurting, oh, hold on, I need to make a dental appointment. Vision start getting a little bit blurry. All right, I think I might need to go get my eyes checked out. Why on earth wouldn't we see someone for the most important resources we have, which is our minds? And there's a stigma around being able to actually talk to someone as if that means that there's something wrong with us. And I really hope to be a voice to change that. A big piece of my healing has come from me acknowledging that all of the stuff that I've been through was damaging. And I need to be able to heal from that. I need some better tools and some better resources to help me manage and navigate the impacts of it. So that healing becomes really, really important as we try to move forward from that healing. And healing is possible. No matter what it is that we've gone through, whether, again, it was abuse of any kind. It could have been physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse and verbal, being neglected, having to deal with scores of violence, whether that was in home or in the community. Poverty is violence. A lot of us have grown up without and struggle to make ends meet. Having individuals taken out of our lives, whether through death, incarceration, especially as it relates to parents. Like, there's a lot of things that many of us have had to navigate, and we've done the best that we can and really admirable jobs. Like, I look at myself, I did an amazing job of getting to the point that I was at. But I had to recognize that that little boy inside of me was still very much damaged. And it was my responsibility and my job to now go and tend to him and make sure that he's as cared for as possible, because everything that he feels, the adult me feels. And it's causing responses and reactions in the way that I'm living my life. If anything, what I want to leave you with is how important it is to be resilient, to continue to find our ways over, around, or through whatever it is that life throws at us. But also recognize there are some things that happen to us that aren't just things that hurt, they're damaging, they're injurious. And in order for us to truly heal and get back on the path to living as vibrant and healthy and full life as we can, we've got to be able to tend to that healing. And a lot of that is emotional and mental healing. So I'll stop there and throw it to any questions. I'm an open book.
Well, this is not a question, Brother Hunt. I just want to tell you, all these brothers are advocates for therapy. You know, I can remember over 30-something years ago when I had therapy when my parents died. In addition to having that therapy, you see that brother up there, Jerome Taylor, he was with me the whole way, you know, and that definitely helped that I had, you know, a couple of people on my side in addition to having the therapy, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we're all advocates here for therapy, brother.
Hey man, I love it.
Yeah.
Love to hear it.
I wanted to. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Joaquin.
Hey, thanks, Brother Hunt. Appreciate that, man. I love that analogy with the windshield, man. It's pretty dope. And
thank you, man.
Yeah, healing is a big thing, but I think too, like you talked about being resilient, and I think like a lot of times, like our resilience makes us feel like we're okay. You know what I mean? Like, yo, I'm good. You know what I mean? I've been through that. I'm good. Like, if I'm so resilient that I'm going my day to day, what is gonna, get me to take a look inside, or maybe see that I do need some healing? It's kind of difficult, you know.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you, bro.
No, I had my goddaughter here. She came for a week, and she come up from the projects like me, and I could see, her pain and still feel it. And I try to talk to her about that and let her know, like, shit is not okay, like how we came up. Like, it's like if you go to war, you have PTSD, right? And I was telling her, like, that shit that we came up in, and her story makes mine look like a Cinderella story. And she didn't want to hear that, you know what I mean? And I think too, like you're talking about, and especially brothers, like we are resilient. But something had to happen to me to make me look for help. You know what I mean? But what if nothing happens to you, just so resilient? What's going to make you say, hey, maybe I need to go get a checkup?
Hopefully it doesn't come to a bottoming out, or it doesn't come to something being so harmful or hurtful that it forces you to reckon with it. But oftentimes that's what it is. Like, what you just described was myself. Like, I was resilient, right? Like, I felt like I had made it past all of those things that I had talked about until I was triggered by something, right? And that trigger now is tap dancing on the worst pains and the worst fears of that little boy, right? And there's no amount of resilience that's going to fix that. There's no amount of resilience that's going to fix that. It's an incomplete metric in trying to address trauma. And I realized that I hadn't addressed my trauma. I hadn't addressed the absolute gut-wrenching feeling of not feeling loved by my mother, of not feeling cared for, right? Like as a little boy, right? All of those things stayed with me. They didn't just die or go by the wayside because I got older or because I got far removed from those things. They all stayed with me, and it all bubbled to the surface and caused the biggest crisis of my adult life. And so it ultimately made me realize that, like, yeah, you were resilient and you got past it, but resilience isn't what you need right now. What you need is to actually heal. You need to confront all of those things that have been laying dormant in your life. Those things that are showing up right now as an adult that happened decades ago, right? But they're still just as painful, just as powerful as if they happened yesterday, right? And so that was life showing up, and it gave me no other choice. Like I had to confront it if I was going to survive. I mean, because literally I had a solid month where every day I woke up with the thought of, I don't want to be here anymore. Like that's how just down bad I was, like how hurt I was, and trying to process and deal with all of these feelings and emotions that I'm having and not knowing where the source of it is, right? And me finally confronting that, and having a really good therapist who could identify that, hey, the things that are showing up for you are things that are rooted in your childhood, right? This is stuff that is fundamental and foundational to how it was that I was raised and the experiences that I had and the complex trauma that I experienced but didn't process. And so my hope is that all of us take the time to investigate that and have the courage to look into that on our own before life forces us to do it. Because if life forces you to do it, it's going to be on life's terms, not yours.
Thank you.
I think we have Brother Ishmael.
Yes, Mr. Hunt, thank you for your time. Thank you for your wisdom. How has forgiveness helped you in your healing journey?
I think it's been helpful. I don't know if it's necessarily a requirement. Like everybody's process is different. But I will say for myself that being able to forgive my mom, being able to forgive my grandmother, has been liberating for me. And it's been liberating in the sense of, I spoke earlier about one of those principles of resilience, that being of perspective. I recognize that, like, all right, if this was the experience that I had, so I have an older sister that my grandmother took in as well. And my grandmother played favorites. My sister was a favorite. She's older, and she's the only girl of grandchildren, and I wasn't. So, like, I got the shitty treatment. My sister didn't. My mom had a brother, my uncle, similar dynamic. My uncle was a favorite. My mom was not. My uncle's kids, my cousins, they were the favorites. I wasn't. So seeing the dynamic play out, I was able to, again, have this different perspective that, like, all right, what was I know what my experience was like and how shitty it was with my grandmother. What was it like for my mom? And what were the things that she experienced that led her to make some of the decisions that she made from the broken place that she was in. And that led her to her addiction. Let's go up the chain. What was it that my grandmother experienced, right? She's born in 1932. God knows what the fuck she saw and what she experienced in Alabama. In Alabama. So recognizing that trauma rolls downhill, right? A lot of the stuff that we experience, because our parents experienced a whole bunch of shit, because their parents experienced some shit, it just rolls downhill until somebody makes a choice to say, all right, it stops here. Right? I'm in therapy now because my folks didn't go to therapy. So I'm making the choice to say, even though it's one of the hardest things that I've done to learn how to have a better relationship with myself and for myself, I'm making the choice to say I'm going to have that better relationship with myself so that I don't repeat this stuff, so that this at least ends with my life. So forgiveness is a piece of that. I don't know how. I try not to be prescriptive in anybody's healing. Like, you get it how you live. I do think it's helpful. I would say for most people, but I stopped short of saying that it's an absolute requirement. Like, you work your healing process the way it works for you.
All right, thank you. We have Brother Samuel.
Yeah, how you doing, brothers? This is a very good. I'm glad I chimed in. I'm at work, and I was like, let me try to get on Dad's Club, and it was done for a reason. I learned a lot about therapists through Dad's Club, which helped me a lot because, a little bit about my story. I was exiled from a church at the age of 12. I thought I was a bad kid. It was bad, bad, bad. And until I met my therapist, which Dad Club recommended me to go to a therapist. And I was telling her my story, and she said, okay, I want you to write your story down without putting you as a bad guy. She said, because it's other things that made you become the way you became. And I wrote it down, and it was just like, wow, I had to forgive myself because I always thought I was this bad guy and I caused it all. So, and years ago, we just didn't do the therapy thing. And I was able to do it. And then even further into the therapy, one day a week, once a month, my therapist included my fiance, and we did it together. And I tell you, life been even sweeter than it been before. So I anybody that's thinking about it, give it a shot, because I did, and I learned it through Dad's Club. So,
man, that's beautiful. And you said something I think that's really important. The relationship that you learn, the better relationship that you learn to have with yourself. I feel like that's really the biggest. There's two things that I got. I got some tools from therapy, but then also learning how to have a better relationship with myself. So, one of the things that, in learning to care for myself better, was realizing that, like, I never learned what it means to really care for and love myself. Like, where would I have learned that? Where will many of us have learned that? Like, if we didn't have parents around us or individuals around them who love themselves, how are we going to get imparted with what it means to really love and care for ourselves? Like, a lot of us say we love ourselves, but if we look at our actions and some of the ways in which we treat ourselves, the situations that we put ourselves in, the ways that we talk to ourselves that nobody else knows about, they're not necessarily indicative of love. And so one of the really important and powerful things that I've got from my therapy is how to love and care for myself better. What are the ways in which I need to speak better to myself? It's really wild. One day I was in the mirror. I was looking at myself in the mirror, and I caught myself having like thoughts that, like, if somebody else had said this to me, like, we moving furniture. And like, I literally said to myself, like, I'm looking in the mirror and I said, who the fuck you think you're talking to? Like, who are you talking to like that? How are you talking to yourself in this manner? Right. And so, how is it that we start to become more gracious with ourselves, more kind with ourselves, more loving to ourselves? That's a big piece of what it means for us to heal, what it means for us to have a better relationship to and with ourselves. It's the best relationship that we'll ever have if we invest in it.
Thank you so much. And I just want to quickly say a quick thing, brother Jerome, and then you'll be next. Um, I just wanted to say that I think brother AM said something earlier, and I just wanted to share that I found therapy was amazing for me, but also having my close circle of friends that understood my heart and cared and understood where I was and what I was going through. I needed that group outside of therapy. And I think for me, they were both important, but I appreciated the therapist because that is the professional. But I also appreciated the circle outside
Yeah.
of the therapy because I don't know what I would have done with just the therapist and myself, as you were just talking about. The amazing thing you said about is having the better relationship with yourself. I don't think I would have been able to handle the therapy and talk to myself in the right way without that circle. I don't know if that makes any sense, but yeah, that
No,
better
it
relationship with
absolutely
your,
does.
yeah, that better relationship with yourself. That's something. That's my next huge project because I think that's an amazing thing. And I also wanted to share that that one week the guys on this call, and I know you were talking about some of the things that are traumas from childhood. One activity that we did do on this call, we did the ACEs test,
Mhm.
and I don't want, well, it was my activity, so I don't want to say that the brothers enjoyed it and thought it was great, but I think we had a great conversation, and I
Yeah.
think it was very beneficial because I think it touched a lot of spots where sometimes we don't think about it anymore. And if you don't think about it, it's like just because you throw it back there doesn't mean it's not there anymore. It's still there. And it kind of brought different emotions back from different people. So I just wanted to share we did that. And I guess I didn't really have a question. I'm sorry. But I just wanted to say that having my circle outside of therapy was beneficial. And thank you for sharing the better relationship with yourself, because I believe that makes a difference in how you present yourself to the world. I just want to share that.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. And I will add on really quickly. I think so many problems that we see manifesting as adults have their roots in our childhood.
Absolutely. And I'm finding that the older I get, that's, yeah.
I mean, we
Right.
made do the best way that we could, and in the childlike understanding that we had, we did what we could to survive, but didn't recognize that, hey, those things were really, really harmful, and they're manifesting in in harmful ways as adults.
Thank you so much. Brother Jerome.
Thank you, brother, for sharing that with us, man. Shout out to Oakland. I got 4 sisters out in Oakland. They go way back. They've been there for a long time. So, one of the things I appreciate you pointing out is that a lot of people, as adults, bury that trauma that they had in their childhood, and they hold that animosity to other adults in their family that weren't there to protect them or love them or whatever. One of the reasons I found healing was good is when you find out those stories or research your family history, like your mother, your grandmother, stuff like that, and find out what they've been through, and look at the time they were living in and how they were displaced and how they were abused. It's not always in black and white, but you can read between the lines when you say, well, who raised you? And where was your father? And where were you born at? And those things, they really give you a picture of who that person was that you was dealing with. Did they have alcoholic problems? Were they raped? You know, it's a lot of stuff that, you know, people just walk around with and they don't say nothing about it. And you want to know why they're so angry.
Right.
Just to say that, you know, as a demographic group of Black men, that we had it easy. We don't have it easy now. 65% of the population in the jails are still Black men. So you can imagine back then what they were going through as men and women. You know, we weren't there to protect our sisters. We couldn't protect ourselves. We were getting lynched. So when you look at the history, you know, it's pretty dramatic. You know what I'm saying? And when I research family tree and stuff like that, it really sets a tone to say, hey, you know, they were hurt, they were damaged, and hurt people hurt people.
Absolutely. And not only do hurt people, I'm also a firm believer that healthy people heal people. Right. So the more that we focus on our individual healing, the more we can then spread that out to other people. Right. Like I look back on myself, and there's so many ways in which I thought that I was a good dude. I thought that I was healthy or whatever. But I look back at the scores of women that I damaged. Right. All the womanizing that I did, not knowing how damaged I was and where it actually stems from. Like, I'm using women as a way to make myself feel better because of all of these other things that have been done to me, right? Because I didn't get love and attention from my parents, right? There's so many ways in which that damage, that hurtness manifests in hurting other people. But again, there's also healing in being healthier, right? The healthier that we are, the less damage that we're actually putting out in the world. But not only is it no damage that we're putting out in the world, we're actually putting healing out into the world.
Thank you. That's true. 100% true.
Thank you so much. All right, Brother Paul.
Hey everybody, how we doing? I wanted to say, so first, I used to think that therapy was just like absolutely just bullshit. I really didn't see the purpose in at all. And I recently had a conversation with a friend of mine who coincidentally he's a therapist, he's a school psychologist. And when we had a conversation, one of the things that dawned on me was, in our conversation, it kind of clicked in my head why therapy actually is actually useful and why it works. And in the conversation, what came up was a lot of people in therapy are typically honest with their therapist. And being honest with your therapist is good. It's a double-edged sword. Being honest with the person who has nothing at stake with you, right? So I can tell you my faults. I can tell you the wrong I've done. I can tell you all these things. And it's therapeutic for me, but my therapist has no skin in the game, right? I can tell you I cheated on my wife, or I beat my wife, or, you know, these things, or her kids outside my marriage. And my therapist has no skin in the game. We're not family. We're not related. I don't go home to you. Who you going to tell, right? And the double-edged sword then becomes, I got it out, but then there's the people that I've actually hurt, right? So then coming home and then telling my wife, hey, look, I got kids outside of marriage. I cheat on you, right? Knowing you got a family and then risking losing or breaking that up. And going back to what you said about trauma and stuff growing up, I've always looked at life through the lens of what you can control and what you can't control. And kind of sitting down, looking in the mirror and reflecting on my life on a consistent basis, or as often as I can, and really just going, man, I'm going through this because of choices that I made, right? I did this, I did this, I did that. And then also looking at my childhood and going, I had no control over A, B, C, D, E, and F. Like you said, like I had no control over being homeless as a kid. But I still had to, as a kid, I still had to deal with that. I still had to go to school. I still had to try to navigate that world. I still had to listen to people make fun of me because of clothes that we wore and et cetera, all the clothes that we couldn't afford. right?
Right.
And then growing up, I had to ask myself, yo, why you mad cheap? Why you don't spend money on this and this and that? And then go, oh, wait, because you grew up like this. Before you didn't have it, and now you do have it, you don't want to lose it because you don't want to go back to that, right? And finding that balance, especially now as you get older, as you're growing, as you're trying to continue navigate the world, like as a father trying to make sure my kids do better than I did. And then I'll look at my kids and I'll see things in me that's in them. And I'm like, man, how did that get there? Right? Because it may not necessarily be good. Like I'll see my kid and they'll be scared of something. I'm like, that reminds me of me when I was younger. I'm like, how did that get into the kid when I'm telling them, nah, don't be scared. You could do it. Believe in yourself, blah, blah, blah. And they look at me like, nope, not doing it. Not right. But then my other kid is like, okay, I'm not scared. I'm trying it. And I'm like, wait a minute, you growing up in the same house, you're hearing the same thing. And so just being honest with yourself and then being honest with people who have a stake in the game when there's pain involved, and also realizing, and I think this is the hardest thing, and I know realizing being honest comes with a price, because once you say it, you can't take it back. Right. And weighing those relationships. And so just being honest with yourself about your trauma, about your pain, the pain you've caused others, and then being honest with the person saying, hey, look, you've hurt me. Right. And so I think it's difficult, and I definitely see the value in therapy. And because I heard somebody say like we're all in the same boat, and I'm like, man, I used to not be there. I used to be like, nah, therapy, I don't know. And so we're all a work in progress.
Like, I just want to reiterate, like, the one of the biggest values for me with therapy was just learning to think better. You know what I'm saying? Like, I remember I was in a bit of a crisis with my therapist, and I was going through a period where I felt like I couldn't do anything right. Like every decision I was making was just the wrong one. Right. And so like, this is the internal message that I'm giving myself. Like I'm fucking up, can't make any good decisions, like, blah, blah, blah. Right. This really fatalistic approach, because everything feels doom and gloom. I'm in the midst of a depression, and everything just feels like the walls are closing in and caving in on me. And my therapist, would just ask me some questions. Well, okay, can you think of times where you actually did make a good decision? Right. And so I got a list of, all of these. Oh, that was a solid one. Oop, that was a good one. That was a great one. And help me to see that the way that I'm looking at this situation is what's making it so much worse. And so a part of the problem, yes, it's whatever the external factors are, but it's also, what is it that I'm telling myself about these things? What am I telling myself about myself? And how wrong that is. Like I'm actually making myself feel worse and giving myself wrong information. Like I have a long track record of making great decisions. I don't get to the point that I'm at in this life right now, far removed from the dope house and the projects that I grew up in. You don't get to this point without making some good decisions. So the whole narrative that I'm telling myself that I'm fucking up, I can't make any good decisions, blah, 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 I'm already giving myself faulty information. I'm already doing myself a disservice. And so having therapy helps us to recognize when we're giving ourselves incorrect information and incorrect messages, right? And those things that are being even more harmful to us than the actual situation that might be presenting itself. So yeah, I'm very glad, very happy to hear that you've come around to the value and the importance of therapy. And I will also say two things about therapy. One, it's like a relationship, right? So every relationship you enter into ain't necessarily going to be the right one. So you may have to go to multiple therapists until you find someone who truly works for you and is giving you the tools and the resources that you need, right? That's really, really important. The other thing I want to highlight is like, I spoke upon healing and its importance or whatever, but what I don't want to undersell is the amount of courage it takes to actually heal. Right? A lot of people talk about healing, but when it really comes time to it, can start to clam up a little bit when it comes to confronting and facing those really, really dark places. Right? There's some things that we've been through, and some messages that we've internalized that we've buried deep, 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 deep inside because they were that fucking painful. They were that hurtful to us. And it takes a whole bunch of courage to go and then confront that darkness, right? All those things that we've locked in that door, in that dungeon, because they were so hurtful and so painful. It takes a lot of courage for us to truly, truly heal. But if you do have the courage and the commitment to it, it'll be one of the best things you've ever done for yourself in your life.
I was just thinking about what Paul was saying and what you were saying too, brother Hunt. But and of course my man Jerome Taylor. It's like a generational thing. I mean, I can remember I was born in 1960, so I'm 63, and I can remember when I was a little kid, if somebody found out you were going to therapy, they would say, "Oh, that boy crazy." When it's just the opposite. You're crazy not to go to therapy, right? But I'm thinking back even further. My parents born in the 20s, so of course my grandparents probably around the 1800s, and then their parents later into the 1800s. You got to look at the effects of slavery in that our ancestors didn't have access to therapy. Therapy is not new. But it's just that our ancestors, I imagine most of us have Southern grandparents, they didn't have that. I remember you said Alabama. They didn't have that access to therapy, when other people had access. And of course, I'm referring to whites. Yeah. So, I mean, that's where the stigma came from about this thing about therapy, because we never had the access. Only
and I think there's
go ahead.
I think there's just a broader mistrust within the Black community of the medical profession, generally, right? Like, so,
Yes.
we have poor health outcomes across the board, right? Physical
Absolutely.
health, and then certainly when you throw in mental health as well. So,
right.
all of the points that you mentioned are, 100% accurate.
And like you were saying, brother Hunt, you have parents from or grandparents from Alabama. Remember Tuskegee? Even the youngest of it, my son is 25. He knows about Tuskegee. So you're right. It was that distrust of the medical profession.
And then throw in what you said. We the notion of what goes on in this house stays in this house. So we don't talk to other people, and then you throw in the gender component to it as men, the way we're conditioned to kind of keep things in, not necessarily tap into our feelings. There's a bunch of different factors, but I just think it's critically important that we're living below our means, we're living below our capability by not focusing on our total health.
All right, great. Brother Tyrone.
Good evening, guys. I just wanted to say something that struck me emotionally when we said about therapy. Right, I'm a social worker, and I was in the military. I did counseling for I've been doing this for like 30 years. And when I was doing intake counseling, and on a military installation, it wasn't Black people didn't come to therapy. It wasn't that I think they were accustomed to speaking out what their problems were, but my experience was, who cares? As a Black person, and you look at generational conversations, it could come from the African American slavery experience, it could come from the Caribbean experience, but like it was like you talk your problems out just to get more frustrated because there was no solution. But as a social worker in the military, I had all kinds of couples come in, talk about their relationship issues, talk about, well, she did this and he did that, and solutions were made. But when it came to Black folks, maybe, and this is just a hypothesis, maybe we had been trained from our parents, from our like friends, to be like, yeah, I could talk about these problems, nobody cares. Or if I tell you my problem, you might take advantage of it. But I think that the reason I love the Real Dads Network is because we come on here and just say, yo, blah, 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 blah. And as Black men, there was no exhaust system. This is one of the exhaust systems. Now, when it comes to therapy, because I do have therapy, I think every therapist should have a therapist, but it comes to the things that bother me. Like I could look at the way I eat and I look at my kitchen and I have extra cereal because when I was young, I had no cereal, no food. So now think about the emotional part of it. There's so many less hugs that I received from my parent that now I know how to hug my daughter and my son, but it took a couple of tries to figure that out. So like the thing is, as Black men, I'm amazed that we get to come on here and say, yo, blah, 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 and this is what's going on with me, and there's no judgment. So the therapy still begins with like having conversation and being able to say the most vulnerable thing. Because the other day a brother said something in our group chat and it brought like a major meeting, but everybody was very supportive. Like that's an amazing process for Black men to be like, yo, I can say this and I can see my brother in the street, I'm gonna get a genuine real hug. That's a positive affirmation, even when you got something negative going on. You know, so I think therapy starts on multi levels of just being comfortable enough to say good morning. If you don't get a good morning back, to smile and be like, oh, you must have a bad one because mine is still good because I gave you a great salutation. So like that's the part of therapy that you can still take a negative and bring it back positive. So I'm thankful just to be able to talk to this group. So like we didn't have this 30 years ago, 40 years ago. There was no space where Black men could say, yo, I know where I could go and talk. Without anger, there's no, yo, you dirty mother. Come on, my mother was sold drugs. She died of AIDS, and we had a drug dealer on here talk about how up he was, and I still was listening, and it was my therapy, because it was like there was a brother that made it, and he might not have seen how it affected the families, but he's still in remorse, saying, "Yo, I'm trying to recover with my daughter." Like there's love in this group. This is therapy in itself. I believe that's therapy.
Absolutely.
I second that, brother. I want to tell the brother Hunt, yeah, this is the hospital, brother. This is where you get treatment, you know, and good treatment, not just a Band-Aid.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. Thank you for that. I just wanted to, and I know we're about to probably wrap up, and I think we have a couple of new brothers, but I kind of wanted to share something as I was listening to some of you guys. Most of the brothers know my growing up situation was different. I came from a 2-parent home. Everyone, we were good. And sometimes I'm listening. I think I heard you say, Brother Hunt, you were mentioning that you were able to do things like put yourself through undergrad, and it's sometimes in a family, in a 2-parent home, where both parents do well. I'm sorry, that's hard for me to say, but do well for themselves. Sometimes the things that you do, it's not even a big deal. So when you go to college, nobody's making a big deal of it because that's what you're supposed to do. And you go back and get another degree. Okay, that's what you were supposed to do. So sometimes I think people look at it, whereas because I grew up without, this is my trauma, but there's also trauma with growing up with, because then no one ever tells you, congratulations. You might have grown up with nothing, but people will show up with the balloons and the everything because I teach in the inner city and they're excited when their kid's about to go somewhere. My parents are like, okay, well, that's what you're supposed to do. So you kind of don't get that. And then you're looking at the other kids, maybe your financial situation is not that good. maybe your living situation is not that good. But from a kid whose financial situation is fine, living situation is fine, not worried about anything, I'm still looking at the other side over there, excited, celebrating that their senior is going off to college. And we're like, oh, okay, well, let's head on to the house because this is what you're supposed to do. So there is still sometimes even that trauma with that. So I kind of don't ever want people to get the impression that like that's the good side, because it's kind of not all the time. So I just want to.
But
the thing
you
is,
know
like,
something?
dysfunction doesn't, dysfunction doesn't discriminate by class, right? Like, so there are people who grew up in two-parent households who had dysfunction, whether that was emotional abuse or neglect. There are people who grew up, with both parents, but it was really volatile, right? So there's domestic violence, or maybe there's some alcoholism or some other addiction, or dysfunction. So, we all have stuff, and that's something that like has become much clearer for me as I've gotten older in the last few years, really, is recognizing that, like, man, we're all carrying stuff, right? Like, all of our parents were just trying to figure this shit out. Some of them had a harder time than others, because of the traumas that they experienced or what have you. But again, even for those who didn't necessarily experience traumas in, the hardcore ways that maybe some of us have, they still maybe weren't necessarily the best parents. They still maybe weren't necessarily providing what it was that their kids specifically needed, even though, it may be in a house, or they didn't have to struggle, or they didn't have to worry about bullets flying, or, they got kissed or hugged or whatever. Like, there still can be things that, for whatever reason, show up as some sort of pain or trauma in each individual. And so, I do think we're better served by not looking at things kind of monolithically, but just recognize individually, we all got our stuff. We all got things that sit with us even to this day. Every one of us got a story from childhood that can transport us right back to that situation. Freshest day, just like it happened.
I want to say this to my brother Carlton. Brother Carlton, you have experienced the same trauma that most of us have experienced. If you have friends who had trauma and you really cared about those friends, unconsciously, you have that same trauma that they have experienced, although, like you said, you came from a two-parent household, but what about your friends that you cared about who had it rough? You unconsciously took on that trauma. So you share it also, brother.
And last thing I want to share with you, Charles, is this. And I sometimes, and because I now teach in the inner city, I hear so many parents that assume that I now have a better life for my children because we don't live in the projects and we have a home. And I'm like, no, you can still deliver. It's like there's more to it than the house and the shoes. And a lot of times, unfortunately, with working in the inner city and in a lot of Black schools, that's kind of the interpretation of you won't have to deal with the things that I dealt with. And I think that what you just said earlier spoke to that.
Well, I think there's a recognition that for so many of us, financial trauma and economic trauma is so prevalent, right? And it's really interesting because, while money, it doesn't buy happiness, right? It can absolutely buy a lot of stuff, right? And it can prevent a lot of stuff, right? And so, it's very easy to see how people who are struggling with finances can go to how, hey, you having more resources means that you're going to be absent X, Y, and Z struggles. We know that that's not necessarily true, but I think we all also know how much trauma comes from just not having your basic necessities met.
I think we have, thank you so much. Brother George.
So good evening. Great conversation. Definitely, brother, thank you for sharing your story, man. I think that your story is definitely needed just based off of the fact of even the conversation we kind of having right now, right? Trauma, what trauma is. And I think a lot of times, and especially me, you know, growing up in the city, Lower East Side, dirty, gritty, crack valves, crackheads, beer bottles, and then being able to purchase a house for my daughters and my wife and myself, seeing the difference of the dynamics of the people that I live around, right? A lot of European Caucasian people who, truth of the matter is, like, I worked with this one dude who told me about his struggles of once being a crackhead, but now he's a good, you know, he's a good God-fearing and all that, and then kind of in a sense trying to convince me that he understands the struggle. Being a white dude, understands the struggle of black and brown because of where he grew up, right? But I always had to remind him, like, again, your worst days probably better than some of my best days, right? So I think, and I say that to say that this conversation is so needed and very loaded, but very much needed to understand that trauma does not change. And I think you said it, brother. Trauma does not change based off of class. Because there are people, black and brown, that may have been born in certain luxuries and so on and so forth, but there's still people looking down on them. You know what I mean? And I think that one of the biggest things is understanding that trauma is not necessarily a financial thing, right? I think more so it's a thing that, because there's many people who grew up with boats, houses, mansions, and still were not accepted by other categories that they wish they were accepted by. So what happens is their comfort within their own skin is a traumatic experience and situation that they're going through. So you know, to wrap it up real quick, all I would say is, I mean, for the most part, I think that we must be mindful, and I love this conversation. I think that we must be mindful that in the situation in which trauma, and I think I said this before during one of our meetings, I love the fact that my elevators were pissing. I don't like that I was there. I love the fact that it has groomed me to understand that challenge and obstacles will never hold me down. Hurdles will never be the reason as to why I will not succeed and complete my mission. If anything, it taught me what I need to do more, so make sure that my daughters and my, you know, those that follow will not go through that, right? So I just wanted to say that. I think that is very important that we understand that money does not equate lack of trauma, nor does equate more trauma. We all got our demons. We all got our things that we got to learn from it. And conversations like these is where we learn, having these hardcore conversations. So shout out to everybody in here, you know, putting into this conversation, man, because I think it's much needed.
Well, we have a couple of more brothers.
Brother George, hold on one second. Thank you, Brother George, for sharing, because we have another guy with the hand up. Brother George, I wanted to tell you, the music teacher in me, I thought you were rapping for a second, but I wasn't really sure. Because there was some rhythm going on in there, but I appreciate that. All the way from Varnville, South Carolina, I appreciate that.
Carlton,
Jerome has his hand up. Brother Jerome has his hand up.
3 more brothers, Brother Carlton, that haven't had anything to say.
We're gonna do that at the end, Brother AM. Okay. But Brother Jerome has his hand up, and we're gonna wrap it up. Yeah.
All right.
Go ahead, Brother Jerome.
Yeah, this is an excellent conversation, brothers, and it's needed to be had because, you know, I'm like you guys, you know, a lot of us came from the hood, you know, a lot of us came out of projects. And I tell everybody all the time, we survived. You know, I feel like a survivor. I feel like I've been through a war. Okay. And then I get up here and buy a house in the suburbs. It don't make your kids no better. They go to school and somebody gonna laugh at them anyway. Okay, they're gonna get beat up. People gonna say, well, you're not wearing the latest thing. You know, your kids are gonna resent you because you ain't from the hood no more. Why are you like you are? You know what I'm saying? My son said, man, my mom was mad cool. She smoked crack. She rent me a room. I'm like, I'm not gonna smoke crack to be cool. You know what I'm saying? I've seen enough junkies in my day to know you know, I never heard a good story come out of it. So they don't understand that because you removed them from that. But, you know, my thing was I survived and I wanted my offspring to survive, but it doesn't eliminate trauma. You could be living in a cardboard box and be happy, or you could be living in a big ass house and be happy. That lady, what's her name, Kate Spade, had a beautiful house with all that money, 11-year-old daughter, married, and cut her wrist in the tub and just died. Boom. Like, you know, so what somebody's going through as an individual is what they're going through, and you got to recognize what they're going through. Not the house they live in, not the car that they driving, not how much money they're making, but what they personally feel and have to go through day by day, that torment there, they need help. And, you know, all the money in the pretty house ain't going to help them.
Thank you so much, Brother Jerome, for sharing that.